Now, moving forward to our next panel that is also brought to us by Kaspersky. The panel talks about what needs to be filled, like what about the gaps that need to be filled to make blockchain more secure and on par with existing centralized security offerings. Now, once again, I would like to remind you to log on to Slido, scan the QR code, and select stage 2. And we have a Q&A session after this, so input your questions on there so they have it on their iPad and they can just, answer your questions after the session. All right, let's get started. The panel is moderated by PAVLO RADCHUK, and he is the blockchain security lead at Hacken. And their title for the panel is Fortifying Blockchain and Crypto, Filling the Vulnerable Gaps. We have prepared a video to introduce our panelists, so put your hands together to welcome our panelist and moderator.
My name is Pavlo RADCHUK. I am blockchain security lead at Hacken. Today with me we have Liz, Pavel, and DARYL. Please introduce yourselves. You have like 4 minutes. Pavel?
Hello, everyone. My name is Pavel POKROVSKY. I'm the blockchain security team lead at Kaspersky. So I've been into information security for like 15 years already. And over the last few years, we were starting developing solutions for securing specifically blockchain projects.
Hi, I'm Liz Steininger, CEO and Managing Director of Least Authority. We focus on security and privacy within technology, especially decentralized distributed technology. And we do security audits. That's one of the things that we're known for in the space.
Hi, my name is DARYL. I'm the COO of CertiK. We are located in New York. We're founded by professors of Yale and at Columbia, and our focus is primarily formal verification, but an end-to-end process. So it's mathematical proofs for security audits, while also we do have our own chain that's focused on applying security first as a principle for things like validation on-chain of security certificates and the like. So excited to be here.
Okay. So when it comes to blockchain technology, everyone is screaming about security. Our protocol is secure, our smart contract is secure, and so on and so on. But let's dig deeper inside it and see whether it's true or not and what underlies it. So Liz, what are the types for projects for blockchain security you're doing? What are the services you provide?
Yeah, so we call it more broadly security consulting, but basically we'll help projects from any point within their software development lifecycle, the product lifecycle of design feedback to security reviews of the code bases prior to launch or even after launch when they're doing feature improvements and stuff like that. And it tends to be that people come to us later in the process. But we do encourage security by design thinking, and that people start to, at least on their own terms, think about security from the beginning of their production lifecycle.
Okay, so DARYL, when customers should start thinking about doing security for their blockchain project?
Yeah, it's exactly the same mindset. I think in terms of thinking about security, you can never really be too soon. It should always be within what you're thinking about. Now, obviously, if you're still in the ideation phase, you won't have something secure. But when thinking about the architecture, there are some decisions you can make early in the process, as opposed to just waiting to the very end and trying to protect it and kind of use body armor versus avoiding the situation to begin with. You could only protect it so much. You might have done some decisions that just don't make sense or will put a bigger attack surface on your body or your project. And so in that case, we do say that people should really think about it at the very beginning and make decisions that are best for their project architecturally to avoid these situations.
Oh, okay, thank you. Pavel, what what experience and knowledge audit company should have in order to do blockchain security projects?
Okay, since we are talking about auditing some software projects, obviously it would be good if company had some software development experience. Also doing some malware research, threat research. So this kind of things I think would be best.
Okay, and like what type of development experience should be like any development experience or like specific like Solidity for smart contract auditors and like Go for easy for blockchain security engineers? What should it be, Pavel?
I think it should be more or less language and technology agnostic, since when we are talking about typical blockchain project, it includes the blockchain part and off-chain part. So ideally, you have to secure both. And those are different technologies. So there are web applications and some heavy backend applications, and obviously different development languages, which is, I don't know, Node.js, Go, and so on and so on. So the company should have experience in both, I'd say, desktop development, backend, high-load development, and web application front-end development.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Daryl?
to add, so I would say I think it's important to differentiate the different types of coding there are. So in the auditing, you're really trying to break something. It's like you're playing offense, and versus when you're building things, what you really learn is how to build it with defense.
Yeah.
So some people are really good at building, aren't necessarily really good at breaking, vice versa. So looking at the skill sets of the teams, what do you really need? Do you need to start something very foundationally strong, or do you want to find someone who's very hacker-like, will think about these ways to manipulate the code and do something that's an attack surface that nobody's done before?
Yeah, and even within a team on a project, you can have one project that varies quite a bit in what it covers. And so to be able to have different team members that can be put together that have complementary skills is also really important.
Okay, yeah.
Let's say if you're looking on a software development company, they usually have people who build, developers, and people who break, testers. So, so two competences.
Okay, for blockchain projects, we typically don't have any standards or methodologies. Each company utilizes its own methodology for review. So Liz, what methodology do you use to do the security review for blockchain?
You know, it depends on what kind of blockchain project it is that we're working on. And I think that there is some methodology that covers all projects, of course, in terms of like maybe how the project is structured, how we approach building the team to look at the project, what kinds of threat modeling that we do for that particular project. That varies, and then it just depends on like what the project is doing. So we review everything from protocols to smart contracts, and how we would approach those the methodology there has to change a little bit.
Okay. Daryl, does your company develop any tools to test the security of smart contracts or blockchain? What they do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's a full gamut to talk about on this. But actually, to start, when I mentioned formal verification, so a little definition could be helpful for those less familiar. But effectively, what that is applying a mathematical proof of all the possibilities of the source code to prove that it's not possible to hit an adverse scenario. So if you check like x squared will never be a negative number. So the variable or the proof itself will show that anything squared will never be negative. Now you could abstract that and apply it to code. So we have an engine that we've used. So the origination of the company, it started from the Yale Research Labs. Yale is an investor of ours. And so we have a perpetual license. We're able to use that to secure the blockchain.
Okay.
Formal verification normally has been mission-critical things like NASA uses it for the Mars rover. You see it in drone technology and aerospace technology. Blockchain is important because there's no take-backs. So once it happens, and it self-executes if it's a smart contract. So we have built an engine to help formally verify. Now it's only as strong as the developer, him or herself. If you don't have a good intention of what you develop, we will still show it's correct. You did what you intended to do, but your intention was bad. And that's something that we cannot really differentiate. And that's where you need some auditors to really check to see architecturally or theoretically, this is probably not what you want to be doing. So we do it from the side of building the infrastructure, but also helping in service and checking in a more manual fashion as well.
Okay. So, Pavel, what are blockchain-specific vulnerabilities? Because blockchain is different from web, mobile. So, what should be engineers look on?
Oh, well, I'd say first of all, you should look on the implementation of consensus mechanism. For example, I'm pretty much sure everyone knows about 51% attack, which is typical to public blockchains and proof of work consensus. There are also examples for BFT, PBFT consensuses, and so on. So in general, it's consensus mechanism. Another interesting issue that we see quite often is the indeterminants. So that means that smart contract must be executed on every node of the blockchain exactly in the same way. So that gives you some limitations on how to use, for example, random numbers or timestamps and so on. So those are two quite typical examples, indeterminants and consensus vulnerabilities.
Okay. And regarding your findings, what was one of the coolest findings, for example, some consensus vulnerability from a real-life project?
No, actually, the coolest discovery we had is that we were able to create a denial of service attack for the whole network, which took 5 days for customer to recover. Luckily, we had it on a test stand and testing environment, but the vulnerability was in one of the API methods, which didn't really accept very big integer. And when we submitted it there, it created an indeterminance in the smart contract and effectively took the whole network down. So that was the coolest finding I can think of.
Cool. Okay, Daryl, you know your competitors and the field where you work in. So what will be the price for blockchain security, for example, smart contract audit?
Yeah, I think probably across the board, a lot of companies have seen this, but it's really dependent on the complexity of the project itself. So I think a proxy you could think about is how much time it's going to take. So if you're trying to do something completely innovative, and that's the beauty of blockchain, is that a lot of these projects are doing something that nobody has done before. Now, the inverse of that is it takes a team of auditors to really understand what are you trying to do, should you be doing it, what else can you be doing, what are more practical ways of doing it. And so our biggest proxy is to see how much time does it take. If it's something that's kind of basic, so today creating a token would be pretty basic, we're able to do it with speed and with an affordable price that could work with the project. But now if it's something that a lot of the projects nowadays are doing mixed versions of smart contracts, interacting with smart contracts, doing something else and having intermediaries removed, then that could take a lot more time. So our process is we want to see the code first and talk to the team to see what do you want to do, and then layer that into a broader solution as opposed to just a one-off, let's audit and just give it back to you. Because I think there's a lot that could be learned just by talking to the teams and figuring that out.
Okay. Liz, what should be the prerequisites for audits? So how customer should prepare himself or itself for the security audit?
Yeah, this is a good question, but I think that this one's quite, I don't know, it seems like it's a kind of an obvious answer, but it's also one that many companies overlook because everybody's rushing to the finish line to write their code and to get their product out, that they forget some of the basic things about software development, which is doing quality checks on your own code. If you're hiring an outside firm to do security auditing, then you want to make sure that the harder stuff is there. You don't want to leave us the easy stuff to find. You want to find that yourselves. So do the internal preparation and also things like documentation and asking yourselves, why are we doing this? What are we hoping to accomplish with the security audit? So what are the risks that we're managing within our organization with our product? What are our concerns here? Because I think defining those and thinking about those things up front help you also maybe select how to approach the audit, your strategy for the timing of the audit, and perhaps what you're prepared to do after the audit with the findings. So if you are doing an audit later in the process and you haven't thought about the architecture and the design in a way that, with security in mind, you could find that you have a significant re-architecture, redesign thing that you have to do to address a security concern that's found later in the game. And so you have to also think about what are we willing to do like if we find certain problems from this audit, are we willing to delay our mainnet launch? Or not, or do we just want to mitigate as best as possible? And so there's like these kinds of concerns of like what the value is, and again, just doing internal tests, write tests, do internal like quality reviews of your code, things like that. Documentation helps because to get the auditing team up familiarized with your code and what you're trying to achieve. These are all things that are just good practices in general, and they also really help prepare you for an audit.
Okay.
Yeah, just wanted to add that from our experience, the environment and documentation are the biggest issues to start the application security project. So when a customer, quite often we have a request from the customer, guys, we want to start tomorrow. It doesn't really work this way. So we need some time to go through the documentation, even if we don't have any agreement signed yet. We are going through the documentation. We expect the customer to have the testing environment because we don't want to take down his production environment. So we need at least, I'd say on average, we need at least a month before we actually start actual project to get prepared.
Okay. Daryl, when you're working on security projects for smart contracts, are you doing it only by yourself, or you constantly interact with the developers or like customer team?
Yeah, I think we always interact with the client because ultimately the code could tell you so much, but if the code doesn't look right, is it because they don't know that as a team, or is it because they did it in the wrong way and they intend something else? So we always have a constant communication. I think that's not only does it make you have a faster result because you could just bounce off the ideas with the person who originated the idea, but ultimately it lets you really collaborate and say, have you thought about this? Is this an implementation? So we always keep a really close line with our clients, even after an audit is complete, because they might have a suggestion. And once you know the code, then you really know, and they've told you about the white paper, they told you about some changes from the white paper. So a lot of times they try to come back and bounce off ideas. But actually one thing, and I think I thought about this when you brought up your points, was security isn't really black and white, where there's some things, because in this space there are people trying new things, that there isn't really an answer. It's kind of subjective. People want to know, hey, if I do it this way, would it be secure? But nobody's done it before, so even as auditors, we won't know the answer. But we could really just try to advise as much as we know based off of the existing information. But if it's about like network volatility or volume-based, you can't really predict what's going to happen ahead of time. You kind of do have to use the test environments, simulate some situations, and then learn to figure out what's the best answer.
Okay. Pavel, when you're doing a security project, you should found all the vulnerabilities possible, but do you guarantee the results there that project doesn't contain any vulnerabilities other than you found?
Very good question. Tricky one. No, and I don't think anyone can guarantee a 100% result. I'll explain why. First, there are zero-day vulnerabilities. Even when we apply techniques such as fuzzing, which allows us to find the zero-day theoretically, we still cannot guarantee that we found all of them. And the second, the environment tends to change. You upgrade a database, you upgrade the blockchain platform, Ethereum, so it's totally different environment. Third, we cannot really guarantee that it's going to be the same in production that is deployed in the test environment. And maybe the last but not the least, you can't really guarantee the absence of vulnerabilities in compilers. For example, if we are talking on some heavy stuff such as Hyperledger Fabric, and the Go compiler might be tricky.
Or dependencies too.
Dependencies, yeah, very good question.
Can't...
Specifically when we're talking about Node.js, for example.
Yeah.
Tons.
Yeah.
Very, very good remark. Thank you.
Okay, so no security company guarantees any bug-free status for the code. So why should customers still do the security reviews for their blockchains? Liz.
Sure, it's about risk management. So yeah, there's no guarantees, but you can reduce the risk of something happening. And so that's where it depends on the project, it depends on the threat model, it depends on the business behind the project as to how much they value addressing that particular risk. So in the cases of if it's, I don't know, maybe something for fun and there's not money involved, then perhaps, money's not being moved, then perhaps your risk profile is going to be different than if there's money. If there's money, people are incentivized to go after it. So there's a different threat model there. And so I think that, if you just go into it with a mindset of, what does this risk matter to us? Then it helps you figure out whether or not it's worth doing an audit, or multiple, actually. Speaking about not being able to guarantee things, having one good strategy that we recommend too is to have multiple auditing firms look at something, because each team, each person on a team has a different perspective that they're bringing to the table, different experience, different strengths of what things that they can find. And even if you get the perfectly matched team for your project, there's still probably something else out there that maybe another team could find. And so again, it's how much investment for how much risk reduction that you want to make.
Okay.
Yeah, I completely share the risk-based approach. So what I like to think is that the idea of cybersecurity is not make it 100% of bugs-free, but just to make it for a bad person as expensive as possible to exploit the vulnerability. So it's economically not really justified for a bad person to hack a platform. And that's the idea of cybersecurity at the end of the day.
Sure. Daryl, what's your vision on the audits? Should the company do multiple audits for the same product, or one is enough?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty much, I think, across the board. I guess the way we see it, and maybe across the board as well, is as long as other auditors are helping make things more secure, then that's great. So it's not really competitive in the sense of oh, we don't like these guys, we don't like these guys. If somebody's doing something that's not secure, but putting a stamp as if it is secure, that's a different story, because you're not helping out the space, and the space is too small. Every next hack in blockchain will make people out of blockchain not want to enter. And think about the enterprises that have lots to lose, that have not done blockchain yet. Maybe they're prototyping some things, but then you see something happen with Ethereum, and now they're like, well, do we really want to risk putting these assets on the blockchain? And so I would say, actually, to the point before about just not having guarantees, I think that's completely true. And it's somewhat a misconception for, in our space, of formal verification. So you could formally verify things in a set of checks that you're checking against. So if you say an integer overflow will never happen, you could check against it, you'll compute everything, it will never happen, just because the numbers won't make that happen. But you can't say I'm formally verifying against everything as an open set. It's pretty much a closed set of things that you're checking against. And by that, we try to do the most critical things, and we check against those by looking at what are historical vulnerabilities. Let's check against that and really make sure you have this confidence now. But you can't really do an open-ended version. But going into our approach of that is, because our background of the core team was in the building of strong software as opposed to the pure breaking, we're trying to build, and our blockchain itself is a new chain. It will be interoperable with the EVM, so it's our own virtual machine. It will allow people to run it, use our token or our coin to run their smart contracts, but run it in a sandbox, so it will not break other existing ones. Run it in a way that it's interoperable with other chains as well, so you could now put two different chains. We built it on Cosmos in Tendermint, but we work with the EVM, so now Ethereum smart contracts could run on Cosmos with us. We're building compilers from the ground up. So really, we're trying to give these tools for developers to have a choice in doing security first. We'll see how that works. Now, we're not touching as focused on scalability or these other aspects that different projects are doing, like privacy. But we think security first is a foundation, and then you bridge the rest. And it's something that makes it pretty unique and interesting, but it's still, we'll see. Everything here is exciting because nobody's done those things before.
Okay, thank you. So Pavel, when we are talking about blockchain security projects, customers shouldn't expect perfectly bug-free code. But what should customer expect as deliverables? What you give to your customers, as a report or maybe other deliverables?
Right. Well, first of all, of course, we provide the report on our discoveries. As a part of the smart contract audit, we usually provide a second chance. So the customer fixes the vulnerabilities. I believe everybody does it. They fix their smart contract, and we make a secondary review afterwards. We also provide the marketing support, which is I'm not sure, probably that's not a unique feature as well. But also what I especially like about all kinds of application security assessment is that we don't just look on the security side of things, but I mean, every developer has this sense of beauty. So when they figure out some, let's say, code smell, they usually give the advice on the code smell, even if it's not directly related to cybersecurity. And I think that's a nice add-on to cybersecurity.
Okay, thank you. Liz, is there any like moral side for a security auditor? So, for example, should auditor look on the code like through user perspective, not the company?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question that, I mean, to be completely honest, our team has lots of debates about. Internal debates talking about like these things. I think some things are pretty clear, but then there's other things that aren't clear. Like, so it's clear that, yeah, if you are an auditing firm and you're saying, we guarantee security, that's unethical, you know, because you can't. And so that there's some stuff that's clear cut. But for example, if we're hired by a client, we're hired by a company that backs the software oftentimes to do that audit. Some cases we're hired by third parties to do an audit, and so it's a different kind of structure. But who pays for the work, I think also can change the dynamics of the work that's occurring. And so if we, you know, as a larger community, if we want to see some of these projects become like true infrastructure for like Web3, the next generation internet, the future, then we should also consider, you know, having real independence through even funding of things too. So that's something that, like, ethically we should all think about. But in terms of even the audit itself, like you mentioned user perspective, that's also something that we think about too, which is that, okay, we get hired, we find these vulnerabilities, and we do think about the user's perspective, but sometimes that's at odds with what the company is trying to achieve. This often comes up in the case of decentralization, when there's claims of decentralization, and you might find that there's centralization, then how do you handle that? Because and I think that that's, again, a larger community discussion of like, what does decentralization mean? How are we using the word in certain circumstances? And then also when it comes to addressing the vulnerabilities that are found, there are times where we'll find stuff, and then maybe the company chooses not to address particular vulnerabilities. And then there becomes like that ethical question of, especially if things are out in production and users are using it with the expectation that things are fixed, but we know that there's something unfixed. Yeah, what is our ethical responsibility to the user, to the community, to disclose those things? Luckily, we've been able to find paths forward on that, to at least be able to negotiate a mitigation strategy with the company. And so this is where I also think that this is like the other value that security consulting and the security audits bring, which is that kind of partnership of helping your company also be in a bigger community, be like responsible to your users in a different way, and to just think bigger than just bottom line.
Okay.
Yeah, just wanted to add that decentralization becomes very interesting when we're talking about private blockchains, because there are multiple companies involved, and every company has their own security policy, and we have to negotiate with each of them to comply to the security policies, and that's, again, that's something that's best to discuss and to concrete in advance before you start the project. That's why I was saying that we need some extra time before we start an actual project. Yeah,
and about preparing for the audit. I mean, this is, again, coming back to, like, if you're preparing your project, preparing your company for an audit, to think about where do you stand on these issues.
Yeah.
Think about what you're looking for, what you gain, what you're willing to go for, and I think that then conveying that to your auditing team and making that an upfront discussion really helps down the road.
Yeah, actually, one specific example for the centralization, there's no answer, but I guess the topic is there are stablecoins that people use today that a single entity can freeze in those ways, where in part of it is it's required by the governments. So the US government, for instance, may say, well, we want to make sure that if something really malicious happens, then we could kind of stop it and have a back door. Now, in those cases, do you say that they cannot release it? Or do you say that, hey, FYI, everyone should know this? Or is it just intended and that's just something you need to kind of keep silent? But I think there's a lot of things that are in the code itself, and the responsibility that we see is that we kind of outline these so people know about it. Now, they can make their own decision. We don't want to be the judge of, is it right or is it wrong? We will just tell informationally, this is what exists for your information. Take it as you will. Don't use that stablecoin if you don't want to. You want to be fully decentralized. Or just use it if the trade-offs are good enough.
Yeah, this topic has come up, I think, in discussions within the security community, too, about there being like this kind of like excess authority within smart contracts, and whether or not that's okay, that if there is like this backdoor, this like, okay, we can just shut it down, is that ethical? Is that okay? And I think that, again, like who are we as individuals to necessarily be the judge for everybody? That we can judge for ourselves, we can report our findings, we can talk to the company, but I think that that's where, again, preparing for companies preparing, that they need to be upfront about that stuff. And if you come into it saying, listen, as part of our business, we need to be able to shut down this contract. And so we're going to have the authority there. We're going to have that point of like control. And hey, auditors, this is part of our business. This is our strategy. And then we can say, okay, cool, we see it. The problem is whenever they say, we don't want that. we don't do that. Like, we don't control it. They're maybe marketing to the users something different. And then we find that. And so that's where it's just, I think, if you're honest with yourselves and your project about what you're doing,
okay, I
then
have
it's good.
one more question related to honesty with the users. So, like, blockchain companies tend to be transparent. And Daryl, what's your opinion on the privacy of the security reports? So, should they be public or should they be private?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess broadly speaking, a lot of code for projects is open source anyway. So they don't tend to have just issues with showing their reports. Now, we do want to respect the privacy of the client. And so whether, I guess you could think about different degrees or a spectrum of how transparent. So maybe we'll say we did the audit. We found there were no critical things defined by this list of what we say is critical. They don't want to show, that's fine. But you could see the code itself, you could check. A lot of what we do when we do formally verify projects is we have the mathematical proofs there. So anyone could run it on their own computers and see, well, you have to download a couple libraries, but you could see that this actually meets the specification. And so that allows full transparency. Now, if the code isn't open source, let's say, it's something that they're not ready yet, but they still want an audit, then we can't do anything with that. So we really try to respect what the client desires. We do push for transparency, and we try to argue that for the client's purpose, it's better for the users, and they will trust you more if you are transparent. But there are times in which it just doesn't make sense for the project. It might be an early stage project, or there might be competitors that will fork the code if they reveal it. And so they want to keep things light, but still get the benefits of doing an audit.
And we take a similar stance on that front. But I do think that this is where it's really important for the community and for all of us as we think about moving forward, that if these projects become the underlying infrastructure for our future, that perhaps we should implement practices of having audits that using open source code, of course, so that it can be independently verified, and then you can have an outside firm and have outside funding options for audits that then are produced publicly. That is outside of the business of security audits that we have to operate in.
Okay, good. We have one interesting question from the audience. So, Pavel, how would you respond to someone who says, we are building business first and we'll take care of security somewhere later?
Okay, it's ultimately a decision of the customer when to take care of security. Again, if customer thinks and have a justified economic model which states that he won't have any significant business impact should his application be hacked or destroyed within the first 6 months, it's their business. So we cannot really tell customer how to run their business. What we can tell as experts is that you need to take care of security before your platform shows up in the production environment. So, but that's just our advice as the cybersecurity experts.
And I think just to add that usually those projects don't come to us, right? Because if they think that security is not important, they're probably not coming to the consultants.
It's a very theoretical question.
Yeah.
Okay, and we are like quite low in time, so a final question, it's to DARYL. So how should customer choose a security provider? How to look on company profile? What are the metrics?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of things that the specific company might look for. So if they do wallets, let's say someone that has experience in wallets. But to keep it more broadly, I think really what I tell people is it's going to be hard to convince somebody that needs security if they don't know that to begin with. Now, once they know that, I think the reports of a project really tell a lot about what was actually done. If they're transparent of the reports, but they should be, I believe for the auditors that are more confident with what their practices are. So if you go to the end first, you look at which clients they've worked with already, you look at the audit reports of that, see what's in depth, what are their processes of what do they actually apply. It tells you a lot of the trail. So going to end first allows you to really see what to expect for your own project. Now, on top of that, you should probably look into the experience of the team. The clients is obviously something that you could ask for recommendations or referrals to existing clients. Really, the diligence that you do should translate to something that's a higher quality for your own project. And based off of a self-selecting manner, the more serious the project, the more serious diligence they will perform on the existing space. But I think there's no answer of how to really do it. A lot of projects, like we said at the beginning, focus on different things, and that's really their specialties. But having multiple auditors is always great, having multiple eyes, because you can't be perfect in this. And really, about the question before, it's all about keeping the trust of your users. So you can maintain that trust if you really do the work up front as a project yourself.
Okay, do you have something to add? Liz, Pavel?
No, good.
That's good advice.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to our panelists. Let's make a little noise for them.
All right, thank you. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you, our panelists. Thank you, Pavel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.